It's been a couple months since my last Beyblade Burst type discussion, but I'm finally back with my video on defense types, and for the narrative here, I just want to talk about why defense types are kind of odd, often experimental as well. In my stamina types video, I talked about how stamina types tended to breach between stamina and defense quite often. Defense did this sometimes, but I do think it stuck to having its own identity more often, and like I said, was pretty experimental at times. Like with most things, it didn't start like this. Single layers were pretty basic. Kirby's here didn't really do a whole lot, just our starting defense type, nothing really of note. Wyvern was pretty similar, I guess it was a bit more round, slightly more stamina-like in that sense. And flipping over, you had Armed, which is a bit more bulky, massive, more ball-like. We'll come back to the kind of ball-like drivers in a bit though, as those do advance quite a bit. But as is, I think Wyvern is just another pretty basic bay. Unicorn kind of had like this counter-attack idea here at these points. Nothing crazy, and again, just generally pretty basic with these parts here, ring defense. Nothing out of the ordinary. Evil Eye was probably the most unique of the single layer defense types. Had this kind of mobile defensive idea. The layer was clearly a bit more jagged than the others. It even had Wing, which was typically an attack disc, and then Needle, which had some more movement compared to the other drivers. So Evil Eye at least had a bit more of an identity to it, but again, it's nothing too unusual yet. So overall, single layer defense types, nothing crazy. Wouldn't expect them to be either. They really just there to introduce the generation and defense types as a whole. Getting into dual layers, things start to move a little bit more. We have Kaiser Kirbyus, again, pretty basic. I think this does make good use of the dual layer concept though, as the upper part has these 6 segments here, while the underneath part just has this chain kind of design. So these parts are different than one another, they're not just pairing into each other. I think that's pretty cool. And then flipping it over, nothing too crazy, limited and press just kind of exists. Again, relatively normal for a defense type, but it does introduce dual layers, again, pretty well. Now, Wild Wyvern does actually change things up a little bit. The layer and disc aren't anything unusual, however, we have the Orbit driver. This is a ball that is free spinning, but unlike other free spinning parts, it's not just free spinning on an axis, the entire ball can just move around as it pleases, something that felt very new and unique to Beyblade, and now we're starting to see that experimentation come in a little bit more. Again, it's still very early in Beyblade Burst, so it's nothing too wild yet, but it's still something. Then we had Baldur as our rare Get Battle Bay. Like with Wyvern, the layer and disc weren't anything out of the ordinary, just more basic defense stuff. However, Bite had a rubber ball kind of idea. It's obviously been done before, but it was new to Burst, so that's at least something of note. Unlike Unicorn went further into the counter-attack idea, having this horn here stick out, just having the one as well. Plus the disc was down, which meant to have the weight at the bottom of the disc, which is kind of interesting. And the Needle, again, more mobile, which does pair to the counter-attack idea a bit better. Pretty interesting bay, to be honest. I feel like unlike Unicorn does get overlooked, but the concept was there. We just don't have any crazy gimmicks to really go along with it. Hotcat Squirtle as a layer is fairly standard, but flipping it over, you have Press, which exists, but Jerk was the second disc in Beyblade Burst to incorporate plastic on it. Had this shock absorption concept as well. It's somewhat noteworthy, but it's nothing that interesting, but for right now, I'm just trying to grab anything I possibly can to talk about, because like I said, the earlier parts of Beyblade Burst just don't have as much going on. Acid Nubis was one of those rare times where I feel like defense and stamina kind of came together, except this time it was from the defense side, not the stamina side. The layer was extremely round. I actually remember people thinking this was a stamina type when it first got revealed. It's hard to really blame them. I mean, the disc yell really does play into that. It is very round. It does have Orbit though, so it is a defense type, but still does feel like kind of a hybrid between the two in a lot of ways. Then there's Exceed Evil Eye. This came out later than the actual dual layer era. It came out during Beyblade Burst God. At least the stock combo anyway. The original layer did come out during the dual layer era as part of the random layer collection. The entire design of this layer is just weird. It has these 3 bracket-like designs. No clue why it's like that. Very striking. In terms of parts, we have Gravity and Atomic. We'll talk about Atomic in a bit. Again, this released late, so I don't want to get into this yet. We'll save that for the proper bay in a minute here, but Exceed Evil Eye, definitely a cool one. But yeah, we saw a little bit more happening with dual layers. Things like Orbit, or unlike Unicorn, I think had a bit more of an identity to them, but still, it is very early, so nothing too dynamic yet. Then we get to Beyblade Burst God. Gimmicks are here, which means that we do have a lot more experimentation coming up. Though not with this one. Christ Satan is pretty bland. It has the 3 rollers, but they don't really do a whole lot. Then flipping it over to Glaive. That's nothing really that noteworthy. Loop is kind of cool. Has the ball-like shape here, but then you have the 2 wheels here on the driver. That's kind of weird, but I feel like they don't really do enough for me to warrant making a big deal out of it. Christ Satan was just kind of the introductory defense type for Beyblade Burst God. Tornado Wyvern is one that I can make a big deal out of. A lot of people felt like the first wave of Beyblade Burst God and their God abilities weren't all too special. Bound was kinda cool, I guess, but the rollers and stamina wings didn't really get many people to care about them. And then in the second month, we of course had Drain Fafnir, and having rubber on a left spin bay was obviously going to be noteworthy. Also the first ever bay in Beyblade Burst to have rubber on the layer, but it wasn't a moving part or a crazy gimmick. Tornado Wyvern also released in the second month though, and its gimmick was pretty insane for the time. It had this free spinning underneath piece to the layer. While it might not seem like much now, at the time this was a pretty huge deal. I mean, having this free spinning piece just seemed really dynamic for the time, and gave more hope for having more dynamic moving parts. And then the driver Atomic, which I did show off a little bit with Exceed Evil Eye. This was its proper debut, and Atomic was an even larger, fully free spinning ball, evolving from Orbit, and then also has this free spinning ridge alongside it. There is a lot going on here. Atomic was absolutely just insane for the time, and was also just a great part. Then we have Blast Genius. Blast Genius's gimmick allows the outer piece to kind of just move up, kind of deflects attacks, I guess, and then Guard here has this sheath thing that comes down. Doesn't spin though. If that spun, I think Guard would be kind of crazy, but it doesn't, so it just kind of exists. Blast Genius doesn't do a whole lot, but still kind of cool, I guess. Then we have Arc Bahamut. The underneath of Arc Bahamut doesn't do a whole lot, unless you want to count it reusing Atomic, but it's really the layer that is the focus here. As it loses clicks, it changes shape. You can kind of see this underneath part shift to cover the gaps here, just barely on this thing, but still, it does make a bit of a difference, and it's meant to make the layer more round, help its defense as it gets closer to bursting. It's a pretty cool idea, but it was far from being perfected here. And lastly, for Beyblade Burst God, we have Duo Apollos. This is a weird fringe case, there's a few like this. Technically, Duo Apollos is a balance set because it uses the Unite driver, and types and burst are based on the driver. However, I put it in the defense category because of the layer, and also I do feel like Unite here as a driver is a bit weird. If you launch this at an angle, it's more aggressive. Could be kind of an attack type in that sense, which would work for Artemis. But if you flat launch it, it stays in the center and does have good KO defense with the rubber on the outside there, making it more defensive for Apollos. So it can kind of work as a defense type driver in that regard. But the layer on this thing is pretty special, as most people are probably aware of. It is very spiky, very odd, very questionable as a defense type, but still it is a defense type layer categorically. But the idea is to basically take half of Apollos, half of Artemis, make it one. And while Apollos is a defense type, Artemis is an attack type, they make a balance type. Because of how all this works between the layer and how the driver's functions can change, I feel like it was fair to put this in the defense type video, and here we are. And while Duo Apollos on its own isn't crazy, of course the fusion gimmick becoming a balance type in that sense, yeah, that is a really, really wild gimmick. So Beyblade Burst God was definitely starting to show off some new stuff. Things like Atomic were absolutely insane for the time. Something like Arc Bahamut was showing some potential. So yeah, we were definitely evolving. Moving on to Beyblade Burst Chosetsu. Emperor Phornios was really just a basic defense type to start the line. Nothing crazy about it. I guess Yard had the free spinning ball, some extra life after death. Yeah, it was just a basic starting defense type. Nothing special about it. But that is in stark contrast to our next defense type, which is Revive Phoenix. This thing is absolutely insane and extremely experimental. Of course, the gimmick is that this outer piece here can fly off during battle, leaving the main body here behind, and then just having the armor piece do whatever it wants. And the driver actually plays into this, having this armor piece here with a PO1 ball. If the armor hits into the rubber, has extra friction, it's able to deflect it better, at least in concept. So it does pair pretty well with the gimmick, and makes for one of the coolest bays in Beyblade Burst Chosetsu. Then we got Hazard Garbius. Garbius is finally back to being a defense type, has reused parts underneath, which is fine. But the layer has this gimmick where basically these two pieces here can push inward, help for defense. Nothing really flashy, but again, functional. Then we got Left Apollos. The underneath of this is completely irrelevant, but the layer itself, it's basically just like Duo Eclipse / Duo Apollos. Except this time they made it left spin, yeah. Apollos just changes from right to left spin. That's actually pretty weird. Very unusual to see, but beyond that, yeah, it's just kind of Apollos, but now in Chosetsu. Then we have Orbeegus. This very much fits the idea of being experimental. The layer has these two metal balls that do spin in place here. They're meant to deflect and destabilize other bays. That's pretty cool. But of course, we have the driver quest. It is a suction cup. It is meant to hit the stadium and just plant there. Had they given Quest some kind of like a ring around this part to help support it, it might have actually kind of functioned, but as is, it just destabilizes too easily, but still. It was definitely an experimental driver for sure, and one of the most striking parts of Beyblade Burst. Then we got Dead Phoenix. The underneath doesn't have anything new, however, the layer is the same as Revive Phoenix. This time does focus more on outer weight distribution though, but the gimmick is the same general concept like this, though this does give these two bays their own pseudo subsystem in a sense, because you can swap the armor pieces around to make Imperfect Phoenix and Perfect Phoenix. Perfect Phoenix being especially noteworthy. So again, that is really weird, but also cool. I think Chosetsu does have a lot more experimentation, a lot more noteworthy stuff. Again, the Phoenix bays are just insane, and Orbegus is just Orbegus. That speaks for itself. Now moving on to Beyblade Burst GT, again, kind of continues off of Chosetsu. It does have some pretty weird stuff though. Bushin Ashura isn't one of them. Again, it's another introductory bay. Doesn't do a whole lot. The layer is really just a defense type, but now modular, as that was the whole thing about GT. Layers are now divided. I guess underneath is kind of cool. It was one of the 3 discs to really introduce the new GT style of disc, bringing back plastic built into the discs, also having moving parts and stuff. Hurricane, of course, being free spinning. Then we have Keep, which is another rubber ball driver. However, this one does free spin on an axis, which that's pretty cool, I would say. So, what is our introductory defense type for GT? It's at least a little better than others. Has some stuff going on, that's nice. After this we have Poison Hydra. This was just released as a layer, and it is a defense layer. The gimmick of Poison is to have these 4 parts here basically be attached by rubber, so they have some shock absorption on them. That's a pretty unique gimmick, I would say. Just wish you got a real combo to it, discounting the random booster line 19 stuff, but doesn't really feel like an actual combo. Moving back to regular base, we have Dread Bahamut. Dread Bahamut uses Gen, a weight that is not metal instead of being rubber, giving it a bit better burst resistance. However, Dread kind of builds on Arc Bahamut's original gimmick, shifting the shape of the layer as it loses clicks. This one being much more apparent, the sides now filling in. It is a much better way to incorporate that shifting idea. I wouldn't say it's perfected, but it is a lot better. Also, Dread Bahamut does have Orbit Metal. This is the first time we saw a metal driver like this, where the bottom part is swapped out for metal, this time having, instead of a free spinning plastic ball, a free spinning metal ball. So that is really cool. So yeah, I'd say Dread Bahamut actually does advance things a fair bit. Then we have Regalia Genesis. I don't think I have to say a whole lot about this one. One of the 2 bays to introduce the infinite lock system. I mean, that just on its own is kind of insane. And then yeah, we also have a Hybrid. Hybrid is a disc driver fusion, the first one in Beyblade Burst, discounting Mugen and Mugen L, but those are more specialty parts, not real parts. And it was also the first ever electric driver, having its own movement patterns and whatnot built into the driver. Yeah, Regalia Genesis is just absolutely insane, one of the most experimental bays at first, arguably the most experimental in general with how insane it is. Then we have Naked Spriggan, one of these weird GT prize bays. Naked itself doesn't do a whole lot, however Paradox does have 2 modes to it, a regular mode which is pretty uninteresting, aside from the fact that the outer part has all the metal on it, but the main draw here is one that's paired with Naked, as it kind of pairs here with the base. And they kind of accommodate one another. Very interesting, kind of like Hell and BT-145 from Metal Fight, except instead of being one of the main huge releases of a season, it's just a weird borderline throwaway random booster prize. Then we have Beyblade Genesis. It doesn't have Hybrid or anything though. You're supposed to put Hybrid on this, as is though it does get Yard Metal. It's another one of these new metal drivers. However, the layer is another Infinite Lock layer, but it also introduces the Big Bang Armor, a new piece that all the Infinite Lock layers can use. It'll add these 2 contact points here, and strengthens the Infinite Lock even more. Very interesting. So Beyblade Burst GT, I think, was very experimental, a lot of weird things here. Really kind of started to give defense its own strange identity, as stamina starts to kind of absorb defense to some degree into it, defense has to kind of do its own thing, and it really does. A lot of strange releases in GT. Moving on to Beyblade Burst Super King, we saw a lot of weird stuff here. Curse Satan's probably the most normal of the bunch. Has these rollers, which are a little better than the original ones, but not by much. And I guess there's 5 of them, not 3 now. Then we have Hurricane reused here, but Universe is kind of cool. It is a very large ball that does free spin on an axis. Then there's also this free spinning ring here. Yeah, this is nothing too noteworthy, but again, it's kind of cool. It was the first offense type of Super King. And then we have Variant Lucifer. So I guess Mobius is kind of cool. It's this weird free spinning thing. Very weird driver, but obviously the main draw here is 2 defense with the 6 rubber blades that can come out. And when spinning, they make a giant barrier. This does kill stamina, but it is very unusual and crazy and experimental. Insane design for a Bey. I have no idea what they were thinking with this one, but I'm glad they were thinking that because even though it's not ideal, it is very, very cool. Then we have Lucifer at the end. They buffed Mobius into Drift, which still has a similar gimmick, but now also has more life after death. Lucifer at the end itself, though, is a limit break Bey. Once it hits 3 clicks, it activates its special gimmick, and this thing just kinda has this stuff drop down and now has a bunch of free spinning parts. So you have these purple parts here, these free spin, and then the giant wall here also free spins. Very, very crazy part in Beyblade Burst right here. 2 pieces independently free spinning on the same part. Very odd. Then we have Jet Wyvern. So right away, I want to talk about just this thing. I have no idea what they were thinking with this one. This is not a good part. Has a weird sharp thing going on here, which doesn't really make much sense. Then this free spinning piece all the way up here, which is completely worthless. No idea why Just exists. Should not exist. Anyway, moving on to the actual ring here, which is Jet. So, Jet is a really weird part. It has rubber on the ring here, a fair amount of it, and the ring functions differently depending on which spin direction it is facing. If it's up against a same spin opponent, it has this gimmick where it can kind of turn and deflect anything that's trying to hit it, which is really cool, but in opposite spin matchups, the rubber is not to take priority, and the blade is locked, which is really, really cool. I like having a gimmick that changes how it functions depending on the spin direction of an opponent. It's a really unusual idea that we don't really see happen like ever. So overall, I feel like Super King was really experimental. Curse 8 was pretty normal, but both Lucifers are wild, especially Variant Lucifer. And then I feel like Jet Wyvern was kind of a sleeper hit. Again, Jet is just really, really cool. I was always a big fan of this. I just wish I was a better driver, but that's its own issue. Then we have Beyblade Burst DB/BU, the last few releases of Burst. Starting off here with Drive Bahamut. Underneath here you have Moment, which is a pretty weird ball driver. It does free spin on an axis, and you have this weird sheath thing here that also free spins and moves. It's kind of like Guard a little bit, except done right. But aside from that, it does have the kind of transformation gimmick that we saw in the other Bahamuts. Except I would say it was now perfected. It uses a rubber lock core. The Bahamut core doesn't have teeth, just the rubber locks. That way Roar can actually change its shape a bit more effectively. So it goes from being somewhat rugged to eventually being very, very round. So just built an older gimmick, but at this point, I'd say it's perfected it. Then we have Prominence Phoenix. The underneath parts aren't anything too special. We've basically seen them before. However, the actual blade here, Prominence, I would say kind of perfects the original gimmick in some sense. It is worse functionally, unfortunately, because it has to clear more plastic to actually get off of the layer, meaning that it does kind of fly out of the stadium more often than the previous ones. So functionally it isn't as good, but the gimmick itself I would say is better, because well yes, it can still fly off, just like the, you know, other Phoenixes like this. It actually has a second mode. So rather than putting the armor on the same way, you can rotate it 90 degrees. Now it's like sideways. And this is its shield mode, where it's now actually harder to knock off, meaning that you could just kind of use it as a giant wall. Really, really creative and clever way to evolve an already crazy gimmick. Getting into the BU side of things, we have Chain Carbius. This isn't anything too noteworthy. It has these 6 chains here. It's basically like the tact gimmick we saw in Tact Voluminous back in GT, which is a balance type. I guess it's now just repurposed for defense. You can force all these out in high mode, otherwise they just kind of flail around. Not really as dynamic as Tact, unfortunately. And then underneath, I mean, Fortress or Dash. Nothing crazy. It does work as a final Kirby, so you do have the same Bahamut mechanic here with the Rubber Lot. Again, just a really, really solid defense type. Almost a classic feeling defense type, which I think does work for Kirby, being one of the first 4 bays and just the first defense type ever in Beyblade Burst, but also just being a motif that hasn't really been relevant in many, many years. So even though it's not as crazy, I think it does work for what it's trying to do. And lastly, we have Barricade Lucifer. Looking at the parts underneath, you do have Bearing and Mobius, which is Mobius, but now has a bearing, so it spins a lot longer. That's pretty cool, but the main draw here is the blade Barricade. It has these 4 rubber pieces, and rather than coming down vertically, they now come out from the side like this, which is probably a more effective way of having the gimmick. It still is a weird gimmick, but again, I think it was a better way to make it, and it's still very weird and creative regardless. So I feel like Beyblade Burst DV/BU wasn't as heavy on the experimentation this time, more just trying to perfect some of these popular motifs with their final evolutions. And that's everything for defense types. Like I said, I feel like a lot of these were very odd, especially as the generation went on. I think this was mainly for 2 reasons. One, being stamina types. I mentioned a couple times here and also made a whole video on the topic, but I feel like stamina and defense tend to breach one another very often, mostly on the stamina side of things. So unless you want defense to be the same way and basically just have 2 types that are the exact same, you'll probably want to do something a little bit different. So defense types had to do something else, and well, in my opinion, they became a lot more experimental. The second has to do with the antagonists of Beyblade Burst. There are still some unique bays outside of that, like Aegis and Bahamut, but we had a 3-season run with the main antagonists having defense types: Phoenix, Genesis, and Lucifer. All these bays having some of the most unique gimmicks in Beyblade Burst, just in general. So when you center the later seasons around these 3, and then also have some weird ones just on the margins, I think it does make the entire type feel a bit weirder, especially because there's multiple of each of these, Genesis appearing twice, and then both Phoenix and Lucifer appearing 3 times, so they make up a decent bulk of these bays. And again, pair a few extra weird bays with them, and you have a lot of crazy stuff in the mid to late part of Beyblade Burst, with those earlier seasons really just acting as a good foundation for the type, and allowing for future experimentation. But anyway, I think that's all to say on the topic. Just glad the video's finally done. It's been on the back burner for a couple months now, but here it is. So anyway, thanks for watching, and bye-bye.